So our next speaker is Dr. Mary Pellicer. She has a lifelong commitment to healing work. She's trained as a family practitioner and practiced conventional medicine in a migrant health clinic centre for years. So she understands the pros and cons of that model and enjoys working in partnership with medical providers to help patients achieve the best health outcomes possible. Dr. Mary is the medical director for applied research for the Institute for the Study of Peak States. She also works in the Institute training trauma therapists in the Peak States model and is part of the ISPS research team. She's committed to bridging the gap between the conventional practice of medicine and the fascinating new discoveries being made in the Institute. So Mary's going to talk to us about potential medical implications of psycho-immunology. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Shane. I'm delighted to be here. Welcome everyone to our third annual Institute. I don't have any slides. I just want to talk a little bit about and chat with you about pathogens and look at just a brief glimpse at the past, what I'm calling the present, which is what I mean during my lifetime, and looking through my crystal ball into the future and what might be coming. Starting with the past. So we have, as in all research, we're standing on the shoulders of giants and the people who have gone before us. So there was a man by the name of Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who is considered to be the father of microbiology. He lived in Holland back in the 1600s. And he was the first person to observe and actually describe what we call microorganisms. He was looking at bacteria and protozoa. So he was the first one to say, oh, there are these tiny, invisible to the naked eye little creatures that are inside of us and are in our environment and the world. Then following more people, and of course I have to mention Pasteur, who he was, did all sorts of things besides giving us pasteurization, but he is really considered to have solved the controversy of whether these little tiny little animals, is what Leeuwenhoek called them, just came by spontaneous generation, just sort of appeared, which is what seemed to happen because they couldn't study them very well, versus that they were not spontaneously generated, but that they reproduced as other animals do. So Pasteur is the person who defined that. Then there was a German doctor by the name of Robert Koch, who he was the first one who really gave a direct demonstration that bacteria, one class of microorganisms, actually cause disease. So he linked those two together. Oh, we not only have these tiny little creatures that are in us, but they can be linked to disease. And then I want to have a little bit of a theme going through here as far as my colleagues and how I was trained as a physician. And some of the ways that we as physicians through history, you will see, are resistant. Let's just say we're resistant to change. So there was a doctor in Vienna, Semmelweis, who in 1850, he was looking at maternity hospitals. And there was a huge problem in maternity hospitals where women went to give birth with something called puerperal infection, basically childbed fever. So a high percentage of women giving birth in these hospitals would develop an infection and die. I mean, sometimes the fatality rate was 20 to 30%. And he was studying this. And he actually figured out that if the doctors wash their hands, which the midwives were much more likely to do than the doctors, another thing entirely, but if doctors washed their hands, the rate of fever went down. It really helped. And he presented a paper to the Vienna Medical Society and talked about the virtues of hand washing to all of these doctors. Now, this really flew in the face of conventional wisdom And the medical community pretty much poo-pooed and rejected his idea. So despite the fact that he had shown that maternal deaths decreased with hand washing, he couldn't get these doctors to adopt it for a long time, possibly because they would have to admit that maybe they were causing a role in these women's death. So this is really an example of medicine going, no, 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 you know, being blind to what's going on and not wanting to change. And then finally, just to close that loop, there was Lord Joseph Lister, who was an English surgeon, and in the late 1800s, he developed antiseptic surgery. And finally, after it was really known that hand washing and organisms could cause these things, it started to be accepted. But it took a long time, is my main point. Okay, so that's our little glimpse into the past. Now into the present, or my present. Let me start by looking at pathogens as a group. So there are five main types of pathogens. We have our bacteria, very commonly known, causing all sorts of infections, from ear infections to pneumonia, gonorrhea, on and on and on. We have our viruses. Of course, we are most familiar right now with COVID, which is a virus. We have helminths, which are basically worms, like tapeworms. Those can also infect us. We have protozoa, which are single cell creatures. The common ones you may have heard of are Plasmodium, which causes malaria, and one I'll talk about a little bit later, Toxoplasma gondii, which causes toxoplasmosis. And finally, prions. Now, prions are different in that a prion is just a protein molecule. It's not alive like we consider bacteria, protozoa to be alive. Viruses are kind of on the fence of whether we would call them alive or not, but it's pretty well understood that prions are just a protein and are not living. But there are diseases that now have been shown to be due to prions. The most notable of one is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I love saying that. Also known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease or mad cow disease. Now, it's not very common, although 300 people in the United States die of mad cow disease every year. And it is considered 100% fatal. They do not know how to treat this. Once a person gets this, it causes brain degeneration, causes dementia, and can cause other psychological symptoms. And this kind of ties into what Gaetan was talking about. But I just want to highlight that disease because you'll hear us talk about prions, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the Institute. So I just want you to clue in, we do know in medicine about a prion-related disease. Now, are there others? There are some others as well, but they're very, very rare. Altogether, with all of those types of pathogens, there's, almost 1,400, 1,500 or so species of human pathogens that are known to cause disease in humans. So that's quite a few. Now, the interesting thing in medicine is that the more we learn in medicine and investigate and grow and stand on the shoulders of our predecessors, the more we are finding that pathogens that cause illness, which before an illness wasn't thought to be due to a pathogen, and now we're discovering this. So I just like to highlight a couple of these from last century, actually late last century. And again, to highlight this theme I have going in how reticent we seem to be in medicine to accept these new findings. So the first one I want to talk about is cervical cancer. So cervical cancer is one of the most common cancers in women. In fact, now it's known that over 99% of all cervical cancers are actually due to HPV infection. And HPV is the human papilloma virus. So it's a viral infection that we now know causes cervical cancer. But at the time that this was discovered, this was in the 1980s, viruses or pathogens causing cancer was not known. And so the person who really pushed and did this research, Dr. Hawson, he really was going against the prevailing wisdom and the dogma of the time. And so it took a long time for that to become accepted, and was considered absolutely a revolutionary concept. He did in fact win the Nobel Prize for this research, so he was recognized for it. But after this was known, if you looked at the research, it really took another 10 years or more before the majority of people who were skeptical really started to accept this. So a long time to accept this big change. The next disease I want to talk about is ulcers. So duodenal ulcers, and there's also gastric ulcers, so just different classifications of them. So now it's accepted that a gram-negative bacillus, it's a type of bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. Isn't that a beautiful name, Helicobacter? I don't know. Anyway, often called H. pylori, that it is the pathogen responsible for probably 90% at least of duodenal ulcers, and almost that a number of gastric ulcers and gastritis. The two researchers who really were the ones who pushed this were actually two Australian researchers, countrymen of our CEO, Dr. Shane McKenzie. In any event, they discovered this link, again, were eventually given the Nobel Prize, but it wasn't an easy, it wasn't something that it was easy for the rest of their colleagues to accept. There was, again, a longstanding belief that ulcers were caused by stress, lifestyle factors, and there's no concept that pathogens could cause this phenomenon. So again, they got a lot of criticism, a lot of skepticism. Basically, their findings were not widely accepted, actively rejected, laughed at, etc. And in fact, Marshall went to quite extremes to try to prove this. So he actually underwent a gastric biopsy. He had a tube put down, took some of his stomach tissue to prove that he did not have any Helicobacter in his system, and he didn't have ulcers. And then he purposely infected himself, took the Helicobacter, and then got sick, and then developed gastritis. So he was directly linking, didn't have Helicobacter, give it to myself, and now look, I'm developing gastritis. And if it hadn't been treated, would have, could have gone on to develop an ulcer. So just again, showing the extremes that have to be gone to try to prove some of these new findings. The last thing I want to talk about before I get into what we're doing in ISPS is toxoplasmosis. Now, toxoplasmosis, it's actually a protozoa called Toxoplasma gondii, and it is pretty prevalent. Many people are infected with this, and it's mostly thought not to cause any symptoms or problems in most people. Now, the big thing about toxoplasma, you may know, is that pregnant women are told you should not clean cat litter because cats are actually the hosts for the Toxoplasma gondii organism. And when a woman is pregnant, the Toxoplasma we know it can cause problems in the fetus and can lead to blindness and other problems with the baby. So that's how we know that Toxoplasma is kind of a problem. But a lot of people, again, are infected with it, and it seems to cause no symptoms. Now, the fascinating thing about Toxoplasma is that, as I said, cats are its host. And as they've studied this, they have actually seen that the Toxoplasma is able to change the behavior of the intermediate host, which is often a mouse or a rat. So again, the Toxoplasma has a greater chance of getting onto the cat. So what this is called the fatal attraction, excuse me, the fatal attraction phenomena. And what this does is it switches the mice and rats, it affects their brain, and it causes a natural fear of the smell of cats, right? So mice are afraid of cats because cats are their predators. And this fatal attraction phenomena caused by the Toxoplasma makes the mice and rats lose that fear. And now they're attracted to cat pee. Yeah? Okay, it even gets more interesting. So in, I think of 2014, two researchers, Das and Vias, they did this study. And they were looking at what is going on in the brains of these mice that is causing this fatal attraction phenomenon. And I'm going to read this so I really get it straight. So Das and Vias presented these results of a study they did that by hypomethylation of certain regulatory elements of key genes, the Toxoplasma is able to reprogram the brain's genetic machinery in such a way that cat odor activates and changes the wiring in the amygdala, that's a part of the brain, responsible for sexual behavior. So this study delivers the first clear evidence of a parasite's ability to use sophisticated epigenetic engineering techniques for the manipulation of the phenotype of its infected host. Basically, what that's saying is the Toxoplasma, this little tiny protozoan parasite, is messing with the epigenetics. It's changing the genes that are turned on and off. That's what the hypomethylation does, causing their behavior to change. Now, that's particularly fascinating for us in ISPS, as you'll see, because as Gaetan talked about last time, one of the main types of trauma that is ubiquitous, I mean, just over the top, we have tons of it, is generational trauma. And we think that generational trauma is mediated through epigenetic changes. So here we have study, yes, it's mice, okay, but that a pathogen is actually messing with the epigenetics and changing behavior. Also with Toxoplasma is interesting is that there have been some, not conclusive at all, but some connections between toxo and schizophrenia, bipolar, and OCD. So again, mental illnesses being linked to pathogens, although again, this is not a direct link at this time. Okay, so on to the future. So I want to talk about the research that we're doing in ISPS. And for me, this really represents the future of treatment of pathogens using our psychoimmunology technique, as Shane and Gaetan have just been talking about. So in ISPS, we have three classes of pathogens that we've identified. Class 1, which we think are prions. Class 2, which are fungal-like parasites, and class 3, bacterial-like parasites. We would also put amoeba and virus probably in class 3. And as I think Shane or Gaetan pointed out, we know how to treat these one by one. But again, the big breakthrough in psychoimmunology is that we can now treat whole species of these pathogens and get them all out of a person and eliminate the symptoms. Another thing I want you to keep in mind here is that we know when we're treating individual pathogens that if we have a class 2 or a class 3, so a fungus or a bacteria, we're looking for that class 1, that prion-like organism. That, and if we clear that, the other 2 go away. So these pathogens often travel in packs, which may be interesting going forward in the future, looking at things. Now, I really like to think about in psychoimmunology kind of 3 groups of disorders, and grouping them in this way. So the first group would be medical conditions that in mainstream medicine are known, there's known pathogenic involvement. Okay, so this is basically all infectious diseases. And so we have pathogens that we've identified that are also identified in mainstream medicine. So the biggest one of these is Lyme's disease. So Lyme's is caused by bacteria, Borrelia. There's actually 4 different species of Borrelia that cause it. And we have a psychoimmunology treatment for Lyme's. Now, it's not perfect. We still have some problems, and I'll talk more about the problems we're having, but we have very, very promising results. And we've had people who have had symptoms, chronic pain, other symptoms, brain fog, etc., fatigue, that when we treat them and that they think they've been diagnosed with chronic Lyme's disease, that it eliminates those symptoms. So we have that connection between a known infectious agent and what we're doing with psychoimmunology. We've actually also had, most of these were chronic Lyme's conditions, but we have had a case where there was an acute Lyme's infection and we were able to clear that as well. We've also we've worked with one person in research who had a tooth infection, again, caused by known bacteria that we were able to, on the fly, treat with psychoimmunology. We've had some clues about herpes zoster, shingles, and herpes simplex cold sores. So there is this link between known infectious agents in mainstream medicine and what we're doing in psychoimmunology. The second group would be medical conditions where maybe there's a suspicion or some researchers think there's a pathogen involved in mainstream medicine, but it's certainly not definitive or accepted. And the big one for that I would like to highlight is OCD that Gaetan talked about, and Shane. And this is not at all accepted that there's a link between pathogens and OCD. But PANDAS, which is short for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder, is associated with streptococcal infections, a bacterial infection. And a child who gets PANDA can have a sudden onset of basically OCD symptoms or a tic disorder. Not well accepted, and often just treatment of the strep doesn't clear it. But there is this evidence out there. The other things that kind of fall into that category are maybe autism. Some people think that people on autism spectrum, that there may be a relation to pathogens. Again, not well accepted at all. The other one would be type 1 diabetes that we've definitely looked at. And there's no sense that it's a pathogen causing that, but there are many people, children who develop type 1 diabetes have had a previous infection, often a viral illness, and that it is thought that possibly it's an environmental trigger for the disease, whereas we think it's clearly due to pathogens. The third group would be medical conditions where there, as far as I can tell, there isn't any clue that there's a pathogenic involvement at all. And the big one for me when I started to have these ahas is TBI, traumatic brain injury. So traumatic brain injuries are caused by trauma to the brain, no pathogens there. And we have a process for that, which again, for us wasn't pathogenic. It was about going back to one of those key developmental moments that Gaetan talked about, and back there, healing trauma seemed to heal what we call the resilience of the brain. So we were healing the resilience at a point back in time. And what happened in the present for our clients is their traumatic brain injury symptoms went away. Okay, which is quite fascinating in and of itself. Now, we've had some little clues that we haven't had time to follow up yet on research when we were looking further at TBI. And what we started to realize is that there were probably, for us, 2 class 2 or fungal type infections that if we cleared them, the person's brain seemed to become resilient. And as I said, we haven't followed up on it, but it was our first clue of, oh, maybe this concept that we're calling resilience is actually due to just this ubiquitous pathogenic infection, probably fungal, but that's not for sure, that makes that tissue more susceptible to injury, as in traumatic brain injury. And that if we actually heal those pathogens, the body may be able to regenerate and heal itself, and the symptoms may go away. So when I think forward and think, oh, if that follows up and if we can show that in brain injury, what about rest of tissues in the body? And is it possible that an underlying ongoing pathogenic infection of, for example, blood vessels might be related to hypertension? And in fact, again, we have some data points and some clues about a couple people that we have found pathogens related to hypertension and been able to shift that a little bit. Much more research needs to be done, but there are these little fascinating clues for me. Now, in closing, and I see I'm running a little bit late, or not yet, I'm not late, but I don't have much time. The last one in that group 3 is dementia. So this was, my father actually died of dementia, but before he died, some of the looking we were doing at that, we think that is probably due to a pathogen as well. So that's quite interesting. So before we can really move forward strongly, there are a number of problems that we need to solve in this whole psycho-immunology processes that we're doing now in the Institute and researching. So theoretically, any particular pathogen we find is simple to heal. It's just a matter of finding the correct generational trauma that seems to be, everyone seems to have the same one for that particular species. And when we heal that precise generational trauma, the pathogenic species ceases to exist in the body and takes with it all the symptoms that it may be causing. Now, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And now we get to the problems. So practically, that was theoretically. Now, practically, what happens is the first thing is that there's resistance. Shane talked about this. So what we have found is that, again, because of other generational trauma, in general, as humans, we are hanging on to our pathogens for dear life. We don't want to let those little babies go. They remind us of our mothers, of our fathers, of our unborn children. There's all sorts of reasons, but at an unconscious level, we want our little sweet little babies, our little precious little pathogens. And this is the biggest challenge that we need to resolve. When we are trying to hang on to things, what can happen is we can become delusional. So the information that we're getting from our inner vision is skewed and is pointing us in other directions. We've seen that certainly for us doing this research, but also in our clients as well. They can't, even when they're very, very good at healing, they can't follow those paths of getting faulty information. Probably, and I want you to go back to that toxoplasma, right? It's messing with our brains, messing with the mice brains. What are pathogens doing to our brains and messing with them, trying to keep themselves safe, right? The pathogens, they're nice environment. They want to keep everything just copacetic, don't rock the boat. So they're doing I think, everything they can to keep us from finding and ejecting them. The other problem we have to solve is once, and as Shane said, we are getting some clues, and we do have a initial treatment for getting past that resistance, although it hasn't been 100% successful. So we need to keep doing research. The bigger questions are, will clients be able to find the proper trauma, and will our therapist be able to guide them properly? And the last little problem there is, are they able to heal it to completion? And we're not, this isn't entirely to my satisfaction resolved, is that if there's just a little bit of the trauma left, is that enough for the pathogen to come in and regenerate and come back? And we've actually seen that in some clients, that their symptoms can go almost completely away, and then we come back the next time to do it again, and now their symptoms have come back full force, and we have to do it again. So that's another problem we need to solve. A problem, my colleagues laugh at me when I say this, but if we really get this working well, I'm concerned about the supply chain problem, right? If we suddenly figure out how to clear type 1 diabetes, and that gets out, you know, through things, I don't think it's going to get out through mainstream medicine, but, you know, there's a lot of people talking on the internet, and there's a whole bunch of type 1 diabetics who want to do it. Are we going to have a supply chain problem? So that would be a good problem to have. But the biggest problem, well, I don't know the biggest problem, but the last problem I want to highlight is that as we're continuing to grow and develop these things in the Institute, we really want to, and Shane said this at the beginning, talk and work with our colleagues in mainstream research and mainstream medicine, mainstream psychology, and start to do cooperative research. The problems there are, first of all, we don't have any direct, you know, under the microscope, electron or otherwise evidence of what we're calling class 1, class 2, and class 3 parasites are the same as what they're calling fungus, protozoa, et cetera. So, I mean, we do in Lyme's disease, but in the others we don't, particularly with prions, there isn't that connection. Our model is very far out of the mainstream, and you know, not really known, much less accepted outside of our small circle. Welcome to our circle if you're new here. And as you saw from those examples I gave earlier, medicine is very reluctant to change. It hangs on to its dogma. It's very comfortable there. So we're, you know, really talking crazy here, and that makes physicians nervous. The other thing is, in order to investigate things, that we are using a peak ability that I'll call inner vision, and that's not at all accepted in mainstream medicine at all, right? We're not using electron microscopes, anything like that. In fact, a lot of this, I don't know if it's possible to. We'll have to see what happens in the future. And lastly, with a nod to Grant, he likes to say that what we're doing here, we're developing a disruptive technology. So if this we solve these problems, and that we can consistently, repeatedly give these results and symptoms go away, right? We've seen that happen. We have had that happen. We just need to do it in much greater numbers. We have to start publishing case studies, get it out there. But if we do that, okay, if we solve these problems and major diseases become very, not only simple to treat, but easy to treat, what is that going to do to the juggernaut of a business known as modern medicine, which includes the pharmaceutical industry? I don't have an answer. I just want to leave you with that thought, and is probably going to be a real reason for a lot of unconscious resistance to bring this forward. So I don't have answers. I think we're looking at what we're doing as the future of medicine. It's super, super exciting. I thank you for being here and listening. And I think I'm out of time. And if we have any questions, I'll be part of the panel and we can chat more then. Thank you. Okay, Shane.
Thank you very much, Mary. Wonderful to get your medical perspective on the work that we're actually doing. And you are right, we are out of time. So there are 4 great questions in there. And like you said, the best way to to respond to those will be with the panel discussion. So all of the presenters will, in 2 hours time, after we've gone through the next 4 presentations, hopefully everyone will be there and be able to respond to some of the questions we haven't got to yet. So thank you, Mary. So